Hi, everyone. I do want to just say thank you for everyone joining in and celebrating International Women's Day today. Thank you to HOK Perspectives for allowing us to come together today and share a little bit about ourselves and about our journeys. I wanted to give a little bit of a backdrop behind why we're doing this. So last year, few of us got together from HOK and went to the NOMA conference and celebrated Kim Dowdell and all her accomplishments, and then all of our NOMA chapters. And we just had a really great time at a brunch. And it was the first time for a lot of us meeting each other in person. Or, some of us have worked together before, and some of us hadn't. And we really it was a casual conversation with us ladies, just talking about our career paths, our passions, and how we got here, and maybe different transitions that we went through from where we started versus where we are, and maybe some challenges along the way. And it was such a great time and a great way to connect with each other and hear each other's journeys. And we were inspired by each other, and we thought it would be great to just share a little bit of some of our stories and some of those things with the broader audience, because maybe there's some alignment, maybe there's some of these stories and challenges that might inspire you. And we'd love to get your questions and your feedback. We definitely encourage participation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And between Katherine and I, we'll try to make sure to get those answered. The way this is going to be set up, just to set the stage, we're going to have a little bit of dialogue with a couple of ladies up front, and then have some more continued dialogue with a couple of other ladies. But where I will be moderating a session, Katherine will be moderating a session. But this is, we're all really here to just speak with each other and hopefully hear from you all as well. So with that, I want to introduce who we have with us today. So I'm Micki Washington. I'm a principal here in our Houston office. I've been with HOK for going on 5 years this year, but been in the industry for going on 23, and I lead workplace in our region. And then I'll let our other panelists introduce themselves, so you can give your proper introduction.
Thank you, Micki. As Micki said, I'll be co-moderating this panel, and I'm Katherine Antarikso. I'm a project architect in our Philadelphia office. I've been with HOK for about 7 years and in the industry for 21. Wow, that seems like it went by fast. I'm also on our Diversity Advisory Council, and if you don't know, HOK Perspectives is an initiative of that council. So if you go on HOK Perspectives on the hub, you'll see different stories from different people around the firm. And this is our first live panel, so we're excited that Chad and Jonathan came up with this idea to come up with a panel where we can engage more people and just a more interactive panel. So you'll just be kind of dropping in our conversation. So thank you so much. And I'll pass it to Lillian.
Hi, I'm Lillian Cooper. I'm a project architect and designer out of the Kansas City office with about 10 years of experience. I will just say up front, I'm in a job trailer in the middle of a punch list. So I'm hoping that it's quiet and that this is all easygoing, but you know what it's like to be on a construction site. So just apologize ahead of time for any obnoxious background noise, but really happy to be here. And I'll pass it to Ai-Lien.
Hey everyone, I'm Ai-Lien Vuong. I'm in the Atlanta office. I am senior design professional, hopefully transitioning my title to architect, hopefully in the next few days, just waiting on that final paperwork to get processed. So yay. I work largely in the science and technology projects right now, and I've been at HOK for a little under 2 years, getting closer to that. And I'll pass it on to Maria.
Hi, good morning. My name is Maria Blanco. I'm a project architect in the Kansas City office. I've been in the industry for almost 28 years, and I've been in HOK for a little bit under 2 years, and I'm also part of the Diversity Advisory Committee. Pass it on to Jen.
Good morning or afternoon, wherever you might be. I'm Geny Munoz, project architect in our San Francisco office, part of the healthcare group, and I've got 14 years of experience, and I'm just coming up on my 3rd year anniversary here at HOK.
Congratulations. Congratulations. So, I'm sure you all saw the picture of all of us sitting around the table. And so we wanted to just um, bring a little bit of that here. Obviously it's a little more formal and, we're not all around the table with mimosas or coffee, but we definitely encourage just that conversational feel. So what I wanted to start with, I wanted to kind of tailor this to Ai-Lien and Lillian. I know that some of the things that we talked about were, your community involvement and the things that are passionate to you. Really giving back to the community, and whether that was from experiences and exposure that you had prior to even joining HOK, or maybe in your personal journeys. I'd love to hear a little bit about what got you passionate about, some of those community engagement efforts, whether they're projects or personal things that you're into. Just share a little bit about that journey, some of the challenges that you faced, and then maybe how you're taking some of those experiences into what you do here at HOK. And I'll start with Lillian.
Thanks for the question, Micki. I just want to say also that this group of women on the screen here are remarkable human beings, and I just have been so inspired to get to know them. So I'm really excited to be having this conversation. I think community engagement has always been near and dear to my heart, but when I started in architecture school, I didn't have any awareness of how that might play into my career. I'm not somebody that knew from an early age that I wanted to be an architect. I just kind of stumbled upon it my junior year in high school when I was looking for colleges, and got lucky that it worked for me. But I remember going to a job fair when I was at K-State, and I wasn't really looking for work. I was just kind of meandering. And the empty booth at the time was with a group called Engineering Ministries International, and I started talking to them, and they have offices all over the world. It is a faith-based organization, but it's a group of architects and engineers and design professionals that do work all over the world in places that really have a lot of need. So I got just kind of casually involved with them, and ended up interning with them in India when I was in between my 4th and my 5th year at K-State. And it really just opened my mind to what it means to use the skills that we have to really give back, and also move with intention and to be mindful with how we spend our time. And fell in love with India, and as I kind of started to move throughout my career in more traditional practice, I have had several opportunities to go back there. But I think there's been a shift really in my focus in the last 5 or so years as I've started to learn and unlearn some things really in the spaces of social impact and social justice, and kind of unlearning white saviorism and even the sort of God complex I think that architects have. We often think we can go into places and solve issues with buildings, and a lot of times that's not what communities need. And so I've really been trying to refocus my attention to the communities that I live in, knowing that Kansas City and even the neighborhood that I'm in, and the country that I live in has so many needs of our own, and that our neighbors deserve just as much attention and amplification as folks on the other side of the globe. So that's been a big awakening and shift really in my practice, and how that has transitioned into HOK. When I started, I didn't really know if there was a place for me here. I didn't see a market or a type of project that really aligned with my passions, and I just kind of started building relationships in the community on my own, and those have since turned into projects that I've brought under the HOK umbrella. So I'm working pretty actively right now with a shelter that serves the unhoused in the East Crossroads in Kansas City. We're working with a day center that focuses on little kids that have experienced some pretty severe trauma, and then just wrote another proposal for another community for those experiencing homelessness. And yeah, it's been really amazing to kind of merge my worlds and to see this starting to gain momentum within HOK. And then as I start talking to some of these people and Ai-Lien and other people with similar perspectives, starting to understand that there's really an appetite, I think, to do more social impact work, or work that is focused around social justice and public interest, focus and community engagement and all of those things. So it really started as me just trying to create a space for myself, but I think has grown into something much more. And I'm really excited to see what happens next.
I love it. How long were you in India?
The first time I was there for a 3-month summer internship. And then I went back for a couple weeks on a project trip in 2015. And then I was working actually with an Indian owned and based nonprofit in 2018, and was continuing work with them for a while. So I actually started at HOK contract so that I could balance my time with the group in India. So
Well, I
yeah.
mean, that's phenomenal exposure, starting from an internship. Not too
Yeah,
many of us could say from an internship, we spent the entire summer abroad. What are some of the things that, doing that? I know you talked about, the savior complex and, trying to
sure.
save everybody, but, how did you overcome some of that? That's ingrained in us as women as well, right?
Mm,
We're expected to be the nurturers. We're expected to be the ones to solve all the world problems and
yeah.
fix everybody. But how did you work through that? I mean, I'm sure it's still an ongoing internal challenge, but how did you work through that, or how are you working through that?
I'm so glad that you asked that, because this conversation is really relevant just in my life right now. It came up in my review yesterday. I think the reality of investing in social impact work almost fully, and then we started a social impact committee in the Kansas City office that is focusing on networking really, and trying to make this almost a market sector, that we're really intentional about pursuing this type of work. So kind of spearheading that, and then also a big part of the equity and design committee and working with Katherine to implement designing for equity framework. And so all of these things are really important, and they're very emotional, and I'm an empathetic sponge, so I absorb all the things. I'm a helper and a peacemaker by nature. And so I think what I've been learning is that I have to balance that with an abundance of self-care. And I think we all do, but I think for this type of work to be sustainable, the time away is just as important. And so I try really hard, not only to use my PTO, but I'll take unpaid time if I have to just make sure that I'm making a lot of extra space doing other things to make the work sustainable. And a lot of that, I think, for me, it looks like travel. For other folks, it might look like something different. But in the stepping away and in experiencing new cultures and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, I think you learn a lot of life skills that allow you to adapt, but also broaden your perspective. And those spaces give me a lot of life and a lot of joy, and then allow me to kind of reinvest in these more social impact focused spaces with renewed energy. So it's a process. I have open conversations about this regularly with my managers and with people who know me, just to say, like, I know myself, and I'm going to get really invested in this, and I'm going to burn myself out. So like I'm going to do my best to help me, but I also need you all to be aware of that and to help me too. So if I start to withdraw because I seem like I'm burnt out, like, I need you to reach out, so it's kind of a level of relational honesty and give and take too with the people who are supporting you and on your team.
Absolutely. And I could imagine, I mean, having allies and advocates to join you in your mission
Yeah,
and your passion also helps to in some way, right, reduce or eliminate that burden that it's all on you to fix everything,
totally.
so having that support system not just to save you from
Right,
burnout, but also
right.
join you in these efforts, making a greater impact, because that way you can continue your efforts, because it's not all on just on your shoulders.
Right. And I think I bring a perspective as a woman, but I'm a cisgendered, straight, tall, extroverted white woman. And with that comes a lot of privilege. And so I can do, I'm trying to wield that, and to take advantage of that to do some good work. And my perspective is only one lens. And so bringing other people alongside you and making space for other people and other voices, I think is so important in any type of project, but in particular in projects where you're working with marginalized communities. Like it can't just be me, because the solution is not going to fit the communities that we're working in. And so bringing a team of diverse voices alongside you, I think, is really crucial.
Absolutely. I really love that. And I appreciate you sharing your journey and, where you are in your journey and your stories. Ai-Lien, I want to shift to you. Tell us a little bit about your journey and, your how you're bringing that connection between your community passions into maybe what you're doing now, or are they different?
Thanks. I think that so I guess to back up a little and give a little information about myself. I am the first generation American from my family. My siblings and I were born in Charlotte, North Carolina, but my parents were refugees during the Vietnam War. And a lot of the kind of community that we grew up with was a very small, tight-knit sort of immigrant community in Charlotte. So small that like the joke was always like, if I don't know you, then like between 1 or 2 degrees, we know each other and or maybe related. And so sort of that like community involvement aspect was just sort of something that I think was just embedded. Like now when I look back, I think, okay, my mom was really involved in the community and she was like a community leader and things like that, but it never really occurs to me. It's just sort of like was connecting with the people in our community. And so when I was younger, my parents really pushed sort of more STEM focused majors for my siblings and I, because they worked really hard to get here and sort of pursued those roles. And for me, I was always like really creative, and so I didn't want to lose that aspect of maybe touching something that was more art related. And so architecture was sort of that great sort of medium where I could kind of mesh together my interest in sort of being creative, but also meshing together more science and math background. That led me to actually my undergrad at Georgia Tech, which is here in Atlanta. Through that experience, I kind of was uh, kind of shocked, I guess, at some of the um, sort of lack of dialogue around how design is sort of impacted and driven sort of by community feedback. A lot of our projects, we would sort of talk about users and talk about how the community is going to be impacted, but we never really had genuine conversations with users, or sort of there was a lot of assumptions being made and there wasn't a lot of actual input. It wasn't actually until I probably started planning school. For grad school, I was both an architecture and planning master's student, that I started to actually engage with the communities in which we were, proposing projects and designing, and actually like, getting a gut check and saying like, oh, I assume this, and then hearing, no, that's not what we want, or that's not what we need. And that was something that I think really made me a more sort of, I guess, community sensitive designer, was just sort of having those kind of real like, oh, okay, like I don't always know, what's best for this community. The community has a lot of input that they can give me. I may have the tools to sort of do something, but certainly I don't have that perspective. And so some of those interests led me to eventually do the Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellowship following my graduation, which put me in Denver, Colorado, working with the Denver Housing Authority. And that was sort of, I think, where I really kind of like, boots on the ground, was doing community engagement and community development work. We were largely working in West Denver. A lot of those neighborhoods are either largely immigrant or largely multi-generational, Chicano American, Mexican American. The community I was working with most directly was a group that I felt also really resonated with because it was largely immigrant and refugee populations, of which more than 50% of the neighborhood were children. And so for me, you know, my parents immigrated here like, many years ago. But for me, just kind of seeing that lens of, okay, these kids are growing up and navigating multiple cultures and a hyphenated identity, and sort of thinking about, what I could bring to the table to make sure that their voices were being heard. So for me, that sort of community engagement aspect really drove a lot of the work that we did. It was actually at some points points of contention with us and our development team, in terms of, no, we need to slow down and like kind of have a second to talk to the neighbors. And if they're not at the table, then like, what are we really doing if we're not like giving them the opportunity to put in their input? Through some of that work, we actually had almost like a spin-off initiative where we were actually like taking some time to actually engage the existing neighborhood organizations and building partnerships, and really just trying to build what eventually became known as like a community connectors program, where we're identifying people who, almost like my mom growing up, was sort of like people who were invested and involved in the community. It's not their full-time job, but sort of they are sort of the gateways to those neighborhoods and those communities. And that was something that I think was something that I really am grateful that I had that exposure to. So when moving back to Atlanta, to kind of go back into a more conventional architecture role, I think that was something that like I was kind of missed a little bit, and certainly through different lenses have tried to integrate that through, pro bono projects or just projects that felt meaningful and impactful to the community, serving the community. But then also like, not every project is going to necessarily, be a shelter or a free clinic or affordable housing, but certainly finding avenues for me to continue to engage in my local community, whether that's through leadership or advocacy work in the AIA, or just sort of independent work that I'm doing on the side, or just kind of how I'm really, and honestly, HOK has been one of the places that I've been very grateful to work in, that there is such a network of people who really want to use design as a means for positive social impact. And I've been really excited also to work with a lot of people through the HOK Impact group, and sort of hearing all the different ways that different offices and different people are really championing community engagement or projects that serve the community through our work. So
I love that. Thank you. I mean, it was something that you said earlier about, you had the tools, but you didn't necessarily, have the voices or the representation. And there's a very famous saying that, nothing about us without us, and I think that that really speaks to the need of, and the importance of having that diverse involvement and representation in the voices of the people that you're designing for, so that you're not just telling them what they're going to get and hope that it works out. It's involving them in the decisions that will be for them.
And then I'll just quickly add, one thing that I also really found valuable was realizing that there's not a one size fit all approach in how you even bring those people to the table. I know, for example, one of the groups that when I joined the project in Denver, we had a hard time reaching was actually the like really elderly Vietnamese refugees that had come here, similar like my parents, who didn't speak a lot of English, so they required sort of translators at meetings. And so for that reason, a lot of times if they didn't fund a translator at the meeting, the groups wouldn't show up because they're like, I don't understand what's going on. So the perspective was sort of like, oh, they don't really care. They're not really invested in what's happening. That they'll be fine with what we do. And I was kind of like, I wonder if there's like another way to sort of like kind of start to bring these folks to the table. So we actually, just as like a total side project, went around and basically invited members of that community to a potluck. Because I was like, the one thing I know about Vietnamese community is they love food, and it's the way we bring each other together. Like in Vietnamese, like the way that you ask somebody how you're doing is actually like, have you eaten yet? Right? Like that's what it translates to. So it's kind of like, okay, this is how we're going to do this. So we like borrow a community kitchen space in the neighborhood and decide we're going to put on this like big pho potluck, right? Like, and it's going to bring all the neighbors out. And at first people are like, oh, well, if only 4 or 5 people show up, don't feel bad. Like it was a good effort, And the next thing we know, there's like, 20, 30 people coming, and they've all brought plates of their own food that they had made at home to bring to the potluck. And one woman in particular was just like just basically walked into the back of the kitchen and was like, I used to own a restaurant when I was in Vietnam, and let me show you, this is how you should be doing this. But anyway, all that to say, once we did that, some of our community engagement officers were sort of surprised and sort of like, we're like, okay, there really is appetite to engage. It's just maybe we're not using the right tools or the right mechanisms to draw them out. And so that was something that made me sort of feel like, there is a layer of sort of cultural competence or sort of understanding that different groups are going to respond to different things. And that honestly, that translates also beyond sort of community engagement from a community development space. That translates to, we're working with different clients, we're working with different user groups. Maybe one way that we approach one thing on one project doesn't always work on another. And so just kind of having that openness was certainly a lesson I learned that I like to take with me through my work now.
No, that's amazing. And I can tell you, I'm not doing well because I haven't eaten today. But um, I think that's a great example, though, of what equity means, right? It's providing the solution that fits for that group, or that it's not going to look the same. Engaging a certain group of people that it would be for engaging a different group of people. It needs to be tailored so that ultimately everybody gets to have the same exposure and the same experience, but how you allow that may differ. And I think that is absolutely amazing, that being able to recognize that for this community, they needed a different approach so that they can be brought back to the conversation and be a part of the solutions. I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much, ladies, for sharing your stories. And I want to pause. I know we're right at a great time to take any questions or comments from the audience. I'd love for you all to share.
Micki, we do have a question, and I'll read it, and then maybe you can decide who should answer, and maybe yourself you can answer. Amanda asked, do you think the construction industry, as being as fast-paced as it is, makes women feel they have to make harder decisions over what career path they chose?
That is a great question.
Do you want to take that?
No, that is a great question, and I've been having conversations around that lately. There's something about there's a certain age group. There's different age groups and different generations that make decisions for their careers for varied reasons, but especially in this, let's say, 7 to 10 year experience range. Um, when the opportunities for advancement or professional development are not as apparent, and it's usually around that age where women are starting to consider families, and what does that look like for their work-life balance, but what does it also look like for advancing in that team or that company. That's when we start to see a lot of those individuals leave the industry, not just leave the job, but leave the industry and go into something completely different because they're not seeing um, those opportunities in the next 2 years, the next 5 years. And so it's really being this is just from my perspective and my research, but just being more aware and more mindful of providing those opportunities for women, especially, and that it's like that millennial, not quite, it's not I hate the term geriatric millennial. What does that mean? Like, that's like, that is a crazy term. But anyway, it's younger than that, but that age group where they're really starting to really take a step back and say, is this really something that I want to invest the next 10 years of my life in? Do I want to make those sacrifices for a family so that I'm working the 60 hours or whatever just to not even go further because that's not even an opportunity for me. So I think there is more pressure, especially in that experience level, to make those decisions of, is this really right for me?
I think too, what I often see, or maybe what I've even struggled with personally, is feeling like industry wide that there's only a few ways to do things, and that's sort of like all in, working all the time, living and breathing architecture is like the way. And a lot of that is those are the folks that we've seen promoted, and those are the folks whose faces we see on leadership websites and things. And so I think we feel like that's the path. And so I've been really trying to fight that for myself. And I mentioned it earlier, but it's like, how do we start to ask other questions? How do we start to have honest conversations with folks in leadership that can help make some of those decisions and advocate for you to really look for a different way? And I think it speaks to the importance too of having women and people of color in leadership who are representing those of us who maybe haven't seen an example of what an alternate way of working and living might look like. So I think the answer is yes, but because of the fast-paced nature of what we do, it does feel like that sometimes. But I would just encourage everyone here to just ask the question, is there another way, and to start talking about it, and leaning on your mentors to maybe brainstorm a different path or a different way of thinking, because I think we're better off if we can maintain these people who are asking those questions and actually provide a diverse range of career paths and thoughts and experiences.
Absolutely.
Snaps.
So maybe segue point, actually, to piggyback on what Lillian is saying. I was part of the HOK cross-office mentoring session last year, and Denise Seguin was my mentor, and he's on the call right now. And I think I was questioning that, what I want to do in my career, I haven't seen other people do. So I think it's about creating your own career path if you feel like you have to choose a certain way. And what he told me was just follow what you're interested in. And that's how I became, and I was already doing work on designing for equity and trying to get us to incorporate a framework into our projects for that. And that came about from my experience doing student centers and being an international student and a commuter student at the same time, and feeling like I didn't belong in my university because I didn't have a place to go to, but that student center is where I could hang out. And it started to get me thinking about, well, how can we make more equitable spaces and campuses? And then why stop at campuses? Why don't we make that at all, architecture? So it's kind of bringing a piece of yourself and what our lived experiences influence the way that we design. So how can we bring a different perspective? Maybe that translates into a career path that is more manageable for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Geny and Maria and to ask this question, because what struck us as we were eating around that table in the brunch was just their stories were so touching. And actually, I want to start with Geny and to talk about, how did you get here? What's your background? And was there ever a time where you kind of questioned your path, deciding to do architecture, and how did you overcome it? So just to tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, thank you for the question. So I think we mentioned earlier, I am a first generation college attendee and graduate as well, and not just college, but higher education specifically. One of the few in my youngest in the family too. So if you want some more pressure, throw that on as well. I have older siblings that didn't finish high school either, so there's a lot of challenges that I coming from an immigrant single parent family household, youngest of 6, and growing up in South Los Angeles. In those days, we called it South Central Los Angeles. And so I was fortunate that I did end up getting placed in a pre-college prep program at my local junior high, and that continued on to high school. So that introduced me to the idea of, the possibilities of actually attending college. I didn't know what I wanted to study until maybe it was my sophomore year that I took drafting, and the idea of architecture got planted in my head. So I went for it, and I left Los Angeles, the only place I had never known, and moved up to the Central California to go to school at Cal Poly. And that was major. Obviously didn't have any friends and no family nearby. The environment was completely different. So I struggled with that quite a bit, to the point that I nearly failed out of architecture school. So that was the first thing. Just not knowing what I was getting myself into, not having any kind of guidance, whether it was registering for classes or even understanding how to fill out FAFSA financial aid stuff, and had no clue, went into it blindly. Fortunately, I did have a great advisor that I continued to visit year after year, whether I needed her or not. She just became a really close friend. But I got to the point where I had to stop taking classes because I lost my financial aid after feeling so out of place and not really knowing what I wanted to do anymore. Couldn't go back home and disappoint the entire family and let them know, like, hey, all the hope you put in me is kind of getting lost right now. Eventually I did take some summer classes and realized I had to stick with it. I didn't know what else I wanted to do, but there is enough in architecture that could take me in several different directions. So I got back in. I took a very challenging design course over the summer, so it compacted into 10 weeks, and eventually got back on course and graduated a few days late or a few years late. But and of course that ended up being in 2008 at the start of the recession. So yet another roadblock because I couldn't get a job. So here I am with my degree in architecture from a great school, working at Home Depot and working at restaurants just to make ends meet because, those loans still had to get paid no matter what I was doing. I eventually did get an opportunity to work at an architecture firm. It was in an administrative position though. And I figured, well, as long as my foot's in the door, one day I'll get put into a full architecture position, which ended up happening. And so that's really how I got started in healthcare. A lot of the work we were doing in those days, because it was still during the downturn, we were doing a lot of renovations and TI work in hospitals throughout the LA area. We were a very small team of 5 at that point, so it was a lot of long hours, a lot of work, but that also meant that I got to work on all phases of a project. Did a lot of independent work. And so I continued with that and eventually moved up to the Bay Area, gave housing a try, didn't really enjoy that. And then decided to go back to healthcare. And so realizing that that really was my passion and the types of projects that we do in healthcare, the impact they have on larger communities. And so I've stuck with that, eventually got licensed as well, which was yet another challenge. And there are still days that, with the pressures of work, of the projects and the demands and the schedules, there are still some days where I'm like, is this really what I want to do? But there's still no plan B. So here I am, And that thought pops into my head for a moment, but at the end of the day, I realize that, we're doing great work. And I need to still stay here and represent the things that I didn't see growing up.
Yeah, and there's a couple of comments in the chat, and I think the one Ricardo said persistence. So what other things did you learn from that, that experience of being first generation college student, and the challenges that you faced at that time? What lessons do you apply now to when you're faced a challenge at work?
Definitely just persevering through it because there is, I think, a greater good at the end of the day, but also setting example, not just for, my nieces and nephews as they make their way through school as well, but the other students that want to be interested, that are interested in architecture and maybe don't see a way for themselves there. So I've always participated, not just in mentoring, but I am having students going to schools and visiting and explaining careers in architecture and related fields, or having students come into the office and really letting them know, these careers are possible for you. There are tools, there are resources out there. And I'm actually later today, I'm starting another mentorship course outside of HOK with Argentina, which is an organization that focuses on raising the 1% of licensed Latina architects. And just that connection and just, again, I didn't have a mentor growing up. I didn't really know what architecture really was. And so my focus now is also just one of the things that they always comment on is lifting as we climb. So not, even though I didn't see myself in the position I am in now, I want others to be able to see themselves getting to this point as well.
Amazing. We have a comment that Chana would love to find out more about the Latina Architects Group. So if you could maybe reach out to them to talk more. And I think that's amazing. We hear about, the 2% of licensed Black architects. We haven't really heard about Latina architects. And, Danielle also mentioned, the importance of representation. And I think what you're doing with the mentoring and just seeing somebody there that looks like you have a similar experience is so amazing for people, right? So okay, so I'm going to switch it over to Maria, and we can go back and forth. Maria, talk to us a little bit about your experience and how did you get here? We thought your story was so interesting too, and talk about a little bit about some of the challenges you faced too in your experience.
So I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and I went to school in the States. But after that, Cornell, Columbia. But after that, I went back to Puerto Rico and I worked for 17 years. And since 2008, Puerto Rico hasn't been able to get out of kind of a recession. So I was lucky, and I had a sister living here in Kansas City. So we came here and we visited and we liked it. So my husband and I sent resumes and we got hired. But at the point, I had a boy in 3rd grade and a daughter in 6th grade. So we just, packed everything and moved. And we are kind of a territory of the United States, but I will say we're kind of cultural immigrants a little bit because we're my native is language is Spanish, and we have kind of a different culture also a little bit. So it was kind of a little bit hard especially for my kids to kind of make that transition. Also, I was working in Puerto Rico in different typologies, right? And then I moved in and I started working in sports architecture. So I also had that kind of jump, that little kind of learning curve about learning a new typology. And so, I've been, but, it's a struggle day by day, but, you at the end of the day, you get it, you can get it done. But but I will say, so what I think I'm very divested in diversity and equity, because I think it's all the work that we're doing now. It's not only for our peers, but at the same time, the people that are coming behind us. So I think it's very important for us to kind of lay the groundwork for the next generations to be able to see themselves in places that they could only dream of. So so that's I could say about that. And so all you guys have really great stories, and yeah, hopefully everything's good. There's going to be a change.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry, after 2 years still. I wanted to ask a follow-up question about, let's say you're on a project site meeting. I've been in situations where I'm the only woman on a construction trailer. Have you had that experience, and what do how do you overcome that? What do you tell yourself? And tell us a little bit more about what your hope is for the future, and how you've dealt with this and what you hope for the future.
Well, yeah, I think I have seen myself many times in that position where you're like the only woman in the room, right? Not even yesterday we had a rep coming in and I was like the only woman in the room. So I think the best way is, it's to actually come in well prepared. I think, to whatever your tour meeting or the project. I think it has taken me kind of work on your make sure you feel secure about what you're saying and you're doing, because I'm sure the people, sometimes you feel that the people around you know a little bit more about you, but than you, but it's not really true if you were prepared. And also, and I've been seeing changes, every day I see more and more. I think I've seen a change especially since I'm working more in sports architecture, which is kind of a little bit more kind of controlled by men. But I think different, new strides in collegiate architecture, for sports. That's good. That's getting really advanced. But what I will say is this: just be prepared, be sure of yourself, because you know what you know, and so that's one of the things I could say.
Is there kind of a time that you've had challenges because of kind of differences in culture that that you've overcome, or what do you think of the idea of kind of like bringing your whole self to work? We hear that a lot, and has that does that what do you has that helped you in any way to have kind of a different perspective?
I couldn't listen to the last part you said. You were kind of caught. Sorry.
So yeah, kind of bringing your this intersectionality, we're women, you're cultural immigrants. How do you bring that into kind of the workplace? And is that a challenge, or is that a bonus, you think?
I think it's a bonus, because throughout, this, your life helps you understand other people. So I think it's about getting empathy, right? And I think empathy will help you deal not only with everybody, right? So if your ability to actually put yourself in somebody else's shoes helps you understand better what you need to do, right? So sometimes I just also, try to do that. How this person is coming from this side, and what can I do to actually put myself in their shoes and try to meander through. It has language is also something that has helped me a lot, because even though I sometimes feel, oh my god, my accent and everything, but maybe I don't feel like I'm not such a good speaker, but at the same time, being able to go out and talk to different people in my language, that makes them feel more comfortable. So I think it's a great asset to have. So that's kind of how but I would like to go back to the theme about women in the profession and how things could change.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I've seen is lately, this with the COVID issue and being able to work more remotely, I think that has given a lot of people the kind of flexibility that they need for their work. And so I think that's the key, to actually being able to have the flexibility to actually move your time around and have, and deal with your family issues. And then, because at the end of the day, you end up working the same time amount of hours. It's just trying to make them work with your schedule. And I think that's having that trend of giving flexibility, I think it's a key. I would also say that it's important for the younger generations. What I've seen of my peers is that if the younger they get to a certain point in their career that they feel, or a certain level, and then they kind of feel that at that point, that's a good point to actually have a family, and then come back. So I think it's trying to think about your career since the day one, and what path you want to kind of take in terms of where you want to be at a certain moment, and then kind of look into that, which I think it's a hard thing to do, right? But I think it's younger generations are starting to do that, to think more about, when they start their career, where can I want to be? And then try to surrender yourself with good mentors, try to find people, surrender you with good people that will help you not only be a better person, but also be better in your career. So.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely the pandemic has shifted some things, and the flexibility is an interesting change that hopefully a lot of women can take advantage of. I want to go back to Geny to ask a question that Katie asked. She said, especially in the beginning of my career, I was the only woman in the client meetings, and sometimes I'm still the only woman on site. What advice would you give for younger designers and architects when representation is sparse? What do you think, Geny?
You're there because you know what you're doing. I know I've often questioned it myself too, but you're there because you know what you're doing. And even when you don't, just say, I'll get back to you. It's it is challenging sometimes, and even then I still struggle because when I am the only female in the room, but at the same time it's like I think back to one of the projects I worked on with and the contractor team. The majority of them were, I could tell, significantly younger than me, and I remember overhearing phone calls they would make. I'm here with the architect, and I always love that because there's no mention of gender. It's just your title, and again, it's because you're there doing your job. You're there doing your job. And so it's where you're supposed to be. And so it's definitely having to quiet those voices of doubt. I still get them every now and then, but we're continuing to learn in all of the opportunities that we're given and all the tasks and roles that we play. So I think that's always the important thing to remember, that even when you don't know something, you'll learn it. And so you deserve to be in that space.
I love it. I'm going to start thinking that too. You're there because you know what you're doing. And that's just, there's so many quotable quotes from today, I thought, when we play it back. And also what you mentioned, I'll circle back to you. There's nothing wrong with saying that. And I learned that a lot doing construction administration. I want to go back to one question that Emily asked, and this I'll open it to anyone on the panel who wants to answer. She asked, what other ways that the business and management of architecture and construction industry can support that way of working and living? I think, more work-life balance is, I think, what Emily mentioned. So whoever wants to answer that, how can the business change to be more supportive?
I think something that Lillian said earlier was sort of like that there's not one way of doing things, and being open to thinking about, the pandemic really shifted the way we thought about how we work together. And that flexibility, I think, was a great sort of the few outcomes of that experience collectively together, knowing that we can still achieve things and be successful in our endeavors with flexible schedules. I think someone made a comment that I just saw that I would advocate for as a younger designer is having more exposure as women to construction. I think for whatever reason, at least for myself and a lot of my friends, like, women don't always necessarily get that exposure to CA or construction until much later in their career. And again, that's anecdotal, but that's something that I personally struggled with for many years, and actually had to switch jobs in order to complete my IDP requirements to get CA, because for many years I would ask and ask and ask, and would never sort of get that opportunity. So I would say that that's something, and also it's a great learning opportunity too, right? Like, how important is it to see something be built that you drew and kind of make those connections? So I think just sort of encouraging more exposure to construction and how things are really built would be a great asset to younger female designers, at least from my perspective.
I like Hannah's comment about no overtime allowed policy. I know to the point that was made before, there's this perception that if we just keep working, keep working, keep working, and it's especially women, we have this tendency to want to just go above and beyond and show that we can do it, show that the family's not going to get in the way, whatever it is, that these aren't going to be our stumbling blocks. And I think really looking at what those policies are, a lot of our European counterparts, they definitely embrace a no overtime. In different parts of the world, they have different policies because they recognize what burnout does. They recognize what there is a need to be able to turn it off. And if the company doesn't enforce that and encourage it, it's not going to really change. So I resonate with that one as well. And I did want to also talk about, it was mentioned in the comments before, and I think it's something we've all shared a lot about, is representation does matter. whether it is being the first generation to go to college or moving your family from, another country, being the only, person of color or a woman of color. It matters. It matters to those of us that are peers because we see someone else has gone through similar struggles and we can relate. But it also matters for those that are coming up because they have somebody now that they can identify with that is making it through their journey. And so it is important for us to have these conversations and to have these platforms to share our voices and our stories.
I think it has to be rooted in values. And I think that the folks at the top who are making the decisions about how people can work and what paths are available, they truly have to believe that there's more value in allowing your diverse employees to live and work in a diverse type of way. They have to believe that there's more value in that than the value that comes from potential monetary gain with overwork. They have to believe that there's more value in the longevity of staff retention than getting a project done and watching the turnover keep happening. And then they have to believe again that having a diversity of experiences in the room is important and that it adds value. It's not the right thing to do. It's not the moral thing to do necessarily, but that it actually makes us and our work better. And I think if the people making the decisions don't believe that truly, if they don't really believe that, if their value systems don't align with those, the things that I just said, then I think that's where the problem lies, is because if we believe that the business is most important or that the fast schedule is most important, then we're not going to take care of our people and those things won't ever happen. So I think it's about a gut check of our value system at the top when people are making those decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we're almost coming up on time. Is there any other discussions or last final thoughts that anyone wants to share? I mean, I know we've talked about a lot and we could continue talking. I think our brunch was like 3 hours long.
I just want to say thank you again for bringing this conversation back to this larger audience. That was a great day for me, and I found so many of your stories so inspiring and so motivational. And Catherine, I still think about when you told me, find your joy. So I still keep that in the back of my mind too. So that was a great opportunity to get to know all of you and hear your stories as well, but also take some lessons back from you and how I continue to move forward in my career.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. There's a couple of hands raised, please. If you have any comments, you can unmute. and we see a lot of comments in the chat. Yes, this is the start of a very important conversation. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this. And we're happy that we can open it up to a larger audience so you can take part. Chad Garrison put a note into the chat. If you have any ideas for a future HOK Perspectives panel, I think we really enjoyed this interactive conversation. It's opened up a lot of different topics that hopefully we can continue talking about, and maybe there will be other important topics to talk about. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lillian, Ai-Lien, Geny, Maria, and Micki for being a part of this. And let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.